Chaldean Grammar, Chapter 5. Finally, we get to the verb. And I'm gonna introduce the verb kind of generically. Then I'm going to give you the present tense. This is a long chapter, and I'll actually suggest that you, if this is your first time learning the language, that you pause about halfway through. I'll tell you when, and kind of focus on that material for a few days before you see the rest of it, but it's up to you. So let's talk about the verb. A verb is a action word. All verbs, nouns, adjectives, and adverbs in Semitic languages are derived from roots of 3 letters. So this is maybe a new concept for you. It's not always 3 letters. We have a chapter later where we're talking about quadrilateral roots, and then there are some roots that are just 2 letters, but nearly all verbs, nouns, adjectives, and adverbs in Semitic languages are derived from roots of 3 letters. These root letters are called radicals, for short, for the Latin for root. So when I say the first radical or the second radical or the third radical, what I mean is the first root letter. You'll see why I need to say root letter, because other letters in the word are not part of the root, they're part of something else. So we're going to start to take a look at that more closely in this chapter. So we have the root letters, these generally 3 letters. The patterns of vowels and other letters added before, after, or between these radicals is what determines the meaning of any particular verb or noun or adjective or adverb. For example, the 3 radicals, so here are I'm giving you an example here. These 3 radicals, gamel, resh, and sheen, in this order, gamel, resh, and then sheen. This root, these 3 roots mean pull. So if you're going to pull, grush, kind of give that meaning. This is what these 3 root letters can produce, among a lot of other things. If you say grush le, so you have these root letters, and then you have this ending right here. This is he pulled in the past tense. You don't have to learn this. I'm not giving you this to memorize. I'm just giving you examples of what you can do with these root letters. If you say bid garish, so now you have the root letters right here at the end, and then you have this thing at the beginning, bid. This is he will pull in the future tense, but it's the same root. If you say garosha, this is a noun. This is somebody who pulls. If you say grisha or grishta, this is something that is pulled. So it's a noun, and here the tau elep at the end makes it a feminine. So now I'm taking a noun, it's a passive noun, and I'm making it feminine. So some feminine noun that is somebody's pulling, you're describing it as grishta. So it's the same root, gamel, resh, and sheen, but you have the tau at the end, you have this yoth in the middle of it, which makes it a passive, but it's the same root. The act of pulling is grasha. So again, don't memorize any of that. I just want to give you an example of how these same root letters can give you nouns, can give you, this is basically an adjective, can give you an infinitive, the act of pulling, can give you all kinds of different verbs, and they all come from the same root. Other languages do that. In fact, right here, the root in English is pull. Well, in English, he will pull. It's the same root, pull. He pulled. Makes it past tense. Puller. I don't know if that's actually a word, but you know what I mean. Something that's pulled, the act of pulling. So here in English also, you have the same root, pull, 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 pull. And then you have stuff before and after it. He pulled. So the ed at the end makes it past tense. He gives you who is doing it. So you have stuff before and after that tells you what's going on, what's happening with this verb and this root, and so on with all of these different forms of the word. So that means the most important things to memorize in studying Chaldean, and I think in basically any language, are the patterns for all the different parts of speech, because all roots follow basically the same patterns. And without knowing the patterns completely and habitually, any real understanding of the language is impossible. So what's going to be really good here is this doesn't just apply to this root, gamer, resh, and sheen. You can take any 3-letter root of any word and you plug it into this pattern, and it's going to mean the same idea, but with that root. So if you take the root to kill, the word to kill is qtal, qut, tayth, and lamad. And if you just plug it into the same pattern, qtal, it means he killed. Bid qatal, he will kill. Qatola means killer. Qtalta means someone who was killed, a woman who was killed. Qtala is the act of killing. And you take any root, you put it into these patterns, and into all the ones that we're going to see for the rest of the book, it's going to be the same thing. You just plug in that root into these patterns, and it's going to mean this. So again, don't worry about this. These are just examples. What I want you to start worrying about is these patterns that we're going to get later in this chapter. And basically for the rest of the book, the thing to focus on is memorizing these patterns as they go and practicing putting new roots into those patterns. Okay. So in order to know all the root letters of a word, we look at the two principal parts of the Chaldean verb, which are the third person masculine singular of the subjunctive tense, along with the infinitive. Okay, this is not very important right now, but this is just to tell you in the dictionary at the end of this book, when you get a verb, you're going to get two words in that entry. You're going to get this form, qayim, and you're going to get this form, qiyama, or garish, grasha. So if you look, I'm on page 197 of the grammar book, and I'm just looking on the right side column, lawish, luasha. That means to wear. Every verb is going to have those two principal parts. They're just going to show you what can happen with that verb and how you can form other verbs with it. You don't really need to worry about that right now. But this is just to inform you of how the dictionary is going to work at the end. I'm going to talk about what the subjunctive tense is in a second, and we'll talk about the infinitive a little bit later. But this is just kind of an informative paragraph. Don't worry so much about this right now. These are the two verbal forms that we found in the dictionary at the end of this book. Okay, let's talk about verbal types. There's different ways to kind of divide the verb. There's a lot of things to talk about with the verb. That's why I'm really going to take my time with this. Okay. A Chaldean verb can be either basic or compound. A basic verb, examples of them are plata, qraya, ba'aya. What is a basic verb or an unaugmented verb? It's a verb without added root letters. Okay, so this is just the root. Plata, qraya, ba'aya. These are the infinitives of the basic unaugmented verb. Or you get compound or augmented roots, verbs. A compound or augmented root has an added meme at the beginning of the root. So maplote, makroye. We are not going to touch these until a later chapter. I'll tell you when. We're not going to touch these until chapter 13. So do not worry about compound or augmented verbs. We'll get to them when we get to them, and they're not that hard. They basically follow the same pattern, but there's an added meme, and it kind of acts a little bit differently. So don't worry about this right now. We're going to spend a good long time on unaugmented verbs in this book. A verb can also be either strong or weak. What's a strong verb? This is an important term to learn in any Semitic grammar. A strong verb means one that does not have any weak root letters. What is a weak root letter? A weak root letter is one that drops out sometimes, that you lose as you're conjugating. As you go into, sometimes you'll go into the past tense, and one of the root letters just goes away. If a root letter can go away, it's called a weak letter. If a root doesn't have any weak letters, it's called a strong verb. So what are the weak letters? What are the letters that can go away? Alap can go away in a conjugation. Waw can go away, and yod can go away. These are the weak letters, the weak root letters. A verb without them is called a strong verb. Here are some examples. Araqa, zmara, plata. Here are some weak verbs, weak roots, that is having an alap, waw, or yod. Qaraya, izala, mkhaya. These are just examples. This one has a yod, qaraya. This one has an alap at the beginning, izala. This one has a yod right here, mkhaya. This actually has an alep at the end. It's not really a yoth. So these are examples of weak verbs. Again, we are not going to touch these until chapter 9. So don't worry about them. This is just to introduce the concept. So right now, for the next several chapters, we're only going to worry about basic, strong verbs. Do not worry about these other ones. I just want to introduce the concept here. And when we get to them, you'll see that it's not a big deal. It's not that hard. Okay. Now, that's just an introduction to the verb in general. Let's talk about an actual example of a verb. Here is, finally, we're able to do something in the sentences that we're writing. The static present tense. I'm giving you the basic present tense. The first pattern or paradigm. This is another nice word to learn, a paradigm, which just means a pattern of a verb. The first one to be presented here is that of the present tense of the verb. There are two versions of this present tense of the to be verb. So the first verb I'm giving you is the most basic verb of any language, is. I'm going to tell you how to say something is. And there are two versions of it. There's the static and there's the dynamic. Static in the sense of I am, dynamic in the sense of I am being. So let's start with the easier one. Here's the static present tense conjugation of to be. I'm going to read through it. Ana iwin means I am, and if it's masculine. So if you're a male, ana iwin is how you say I am. If you're a female, you say ana iwan. So it's the same beginning, e, but the vowel at the end, iwin for masculine, iwan for feminine. Ana iwan, ana iwan. Now, I want to note right from the beginning, you actually don't have to say ana. You can just say iwan, and that by itself means I am. You can just say iwan or iwan. That alone means I am. You can also say ana iwan if you want to sort of stress that it's you that's doing the action, or if you just feel like saying it, it's totally fine to say ana iwan, but you can also just say iwan. There's just two legitimate alternatives, okay? So, ana iwan, ana iwan. Ayet iwit, ayat iwat. So again, ayat iwit means you are, if you're talking to a male. Ayat iwat, if you're talking to a female. Ayat iwat. Don't worry about these heavy dots under the towel. They're grammatical. You don't need to pronounce them. So, ana iwan. So, by the way, in case you didn't recognize these are just the pronouns. Ana, if you didn't memorize them from a previous chapter, ana just means I. Ayat just means you. You should already know these. We saw in the previous chapter. Okay. Au ile. He is. Au ile. And then she is ai ila. Au ile. Ai ila. Or you can say ile ila by itself. We are is achni iwuch. We are achni iwuch or just iwuch. You are achtun wotun. Or you can say iwotun. That's totally fine too. Achtun iwotun or achtun wotun or just iwotun or just wotun. You can just say this word by itself. And you can pronounce this hwasa if you want, or you don't have to. Wotun or iwotun. These are all different options of speaking. And then they are ani ile. Ani ile or just ile. They are. Some dialects will say ila. And they sort of pronounce this vowel, the ila, really heavy, and the yoth kind of gets lost. That's okay too. I think that kind of sounds really close to ila. She is, but that's okay. It's not the end of the world. So you can use the pronouns, or you can just say iwin, iwan, iwit, iwat, ile, ila, iwuch, wotun, ile. I really, really strongly recommend Memorize this until it is embedded in your DNA. These are extremely important words. You'll use them all the time, and you're going to use them even with other verbal constructions. So these are really important to memorize with and without the pronouns. You already should know the pronouns. You should already know them really well, but these is really, really important to memorize. Okay. Notice that the pronouns before the verbs are optional here and in all the following conjugations, and that the difference between iwin and ani iwin is a matter of stress, not of meaning. Okay, I already said that. So the static present tense can be used just like in English. So you can say ana iwin melka. I am the king. Or you can just say iwin melka. I am the king. Adi ila mvita. Remember, adi is this. Adi ila, this is. So now we're using those demonstrative pronouns with these verbs. This is mviti. Remember this ending? My city. Adi ila mviti. This is my city. And you have to say ila, adi ila, because city is feminine, and that's how you say she is. Adi ila mviti. Iuch kaldaye tawe. So now we have a adjective. Iuch, we are. Kaldaye, Chaldeans. Tawe, good. We are good Chaldeans. Iuch kaldaye tawe. Okay. And again, as always, the adjective comes after the noun. Now, let's look at something else. In pronunciation, the first syllable of the static present tense can often be silenced, as in the two examples on the right above. So if you're looking closely, you can say ana, you don't have to say ana iwin, you can just say anawin. You see this? There's a silencer here. There's a batlana. Anawin melka. Or anewin. You can even sort of create that diphthong, the connected sounds. Anawin, anewin melka. Avila. You see here, this is silenced. You can say avila, but you can also say avila. It's kind of like a contraction in English. It's kind of like saying don't instead of do not. It means the same thing. It's just another optional way of speaking. Avila or just avila. Okay. You can even say here, kaldaye wuch tawe. Kaldaye wuch. This E, in all these cases, the E at the beginning can be silenced, and you can just say the ending, and it'll mean the same thing. Okay. Let's look at this other way to give a present tense. This is a different root. So the most basic conjugation of the verb, how, huaya, is the verb to be. It comes from a different root. These have different histories. Don't worry about the difference in history. Worry about just these different forms. This is I am. It's static. You're just stating a fact. This is I am being. Okay. Now, finally, let's talk about the root or the subjunctive conjugation. The word subjunctive might be new to you. It is a different kind of conjugation. It is not the past tense. It's not the present tense. It's not the future tense. The subjunctive tense, it exists in many, many languages, is kind of a polite tense. It's what in English we say, may I go to the bathroom? Let me shake your hand. When we say may I or let me or should I, anything that's similar to that. When I say may I shake your hand, I'm not saying I am shaking your hand. That's not the present tense. I'm not saying I shook your hand, and I'm not saying I will shake your hand. You're sort of asking permission in some way. You're sort of inviting when you say, let us walk together. You're sort of inviting somebody politely along with you. You're not commanding them. It's a kind of a polite invitation or an offer. That is called the subjunctive. It exists in many languages. In English, there's different versions of it. It's let me, may I, should I, something like that. That's how the subjunctive shows up in English. Why am I introducing this now? Because the most basic form of the verb in Chaldean, without any added letters or anything like that, happens to be the subjunctive. This is the most basic. If you just take the root by itself and just say the root, it happens to mean may I or let me. I don't know what that means. Maybe Chaldean is just a very polite language. I don't know. So let me give you this conjugation. And again, this is something that you really, really should memorize. If you want to say, may I be, and it can be all kinds of, you can put whatever you want afterwards. May I be the king? May I be like whatever. May I be, if you're a male, you would say, Hawen. Hawen. May I be. If you're a female, you would say, Hoyan. Hoyan. Hawen. Hoyan. May you be, Howit. This is used in a very common phrase, Howit Basima. It's a way to say sort of thank you or you're welcome. Oh, man, may you have a pleasant day. Howit Basima. Howit, if you're speaking to a female, Hoyat. Howit, Hoyat. Mehi, Howe. And if you notice, this one right here, the third person masculine singular subjunctive is the root of the verb. I don't know why, it just happens to be that way. How may he be? Hoya may she be? Hawuch may we be? Hawotun may you plural be? Hawe may they be? Some villages will say hawa. Okay, hawa. But hawe is fine. So here's the conjugation. Let me say it again. Hawen, hoyan, hawit, hoyat, hawe, hoya, hawuch, hawotun, hawe. This is your first real full verbal conjugation. Memorize this very thoroughly. Now, before you feel overwhelmed, I want you to understand, I want you to realize these patterns and endings, like for example, the noon at the end of may I be, and the tau at the end of you, these patterns are going to be consistent for many, many verbs. So what you're memorizing now isn't just for this one verb, and it's also not just for this one conjugation. It's going to apply a lot. So the better you memorize this, the easier your time you're going to have later on as you're learning the language. Okay? So now you have so far, I am. This is very, very useful. It's much more common than the other one. And then now you have may I be. So these are two words to say I am. Now, one last thing, and I'll pause for a second. Okay. As you can see, the basic conjugation of a verb in Chaldean takes on the meaning of the subjunctive. I talked about that already. The dynamic present tense. So now we talked about the subjunctive. Don't feel overwhelmed. I'm going to also give you the present tense. The present tense of to be. If you don't want to, well, what if I don't want to say may I be? What if I want to say I am being? Is built upon this basic group by adding a kap to the beginning of the word. Best news you heard all day. If you want to make a present tense, all you do is take the subjunctive exactly as it is. If you have this memorized, you take the subjunctive. All you do is put a kap at the beginning, and you have the present tense. That's it. So if you want to say I am being, you say kawen. If you're male, koyan, female, kawit, you are being, masculine, koyat, feminine, kawe, he is being, koya, she is being, kauch, we are being, kawotun, you plural are being, kawe, they are being. Okay. That is the dynamic present tense conjugation of to be. All you do. So if you have this memorized, you have nothing else to learn. You just take a cup and staple it to the beginning, and now you have the present tense. Here's another piece of good news. All present tense conjugations of every verb, not just this one, every verb, you take the subjunctive, which looks very similar to this in every case, and you put a cup at the beginning, and that's how you get every present tense. That's why this book is this long and not 50 times as long, because all verbs really follow the same basic pattern. Okay. So in learning Chaldean, one should make a special effort to memorize ending patterns within conjugations, as well as the tense indicators letters or patterns that indicate a tense, such as kap indicates the present tense. So this is another thing to memorize. A kap at the beginning of a verb always indicates the present tense. This is something you should learn very, very, very well. Such indicators, also called by some grammars diagnostics, will be pointed out as the book progresses. Okay. I really like this word diagnostic. So kap is called a diagnostic of the present tense. Diagnostic means you know it through. So how do I know it's present tense? I know it through this kap. So the kap is called a diagnostic. That's just a grammatical term. You don't have to learn it, but it's a word I like. Okay. Here's a little bit of a historical kind of possibility. This is not important for you to learn, but in the case of the kap indicating the present tense, a probable origin is the word kath or while. So kathhawen, kawen. So while I am being, it kind of becomes a contraction, becomes kawen. Maybe, maybe not. It's not really that important for learning the language. Okay. One more little thing, and then I'll pause for a second. The dynamic present tense of the verb to be is used just like the English present progressive. If you don't know what that is, it looks like this. Ana kawen begrasha. So here, I, kawen, I am being, begrasha, I am being pulling. Okay, that's weird. This sort of just means I'm usually pulling. That's something that I'm usually doing. Kauch bishlama. We are usually in peace. Kawotun sapye. You are usually pure. That's sort of the meaning of it, the way this is used. Okay. I'm going to pause for a second. I'm going to make this all one video, but this is maybe a good place to stop this video. Take a couple of days, memorize the pattern that I just gave you, feel comfortable about it, and then continue. The continuation is based very much on what I just told you, but it might be a lot to do in one chapter. So this is a place to pause. Okay. If you're going to power through, or if you pause and you're coming back, let's talk about the subjunctive of strong verbs. And I hope this is going to be a relief to you because it's fairly easy if you learned what we learned earlier. Strong verbs are those verbs whose three radicals, three root letters, contain no weak letters, that is alep, waw, or yod. We already talked about that. The following are two patterns to illustrate the pattern. Notice that their form is quite similar to the root subjunctive conjugation for to be above. So you already sort of know this. I'm just giving you a different example. Here is the root or the subjunctive of to pull. I want to do this here. Here's the root of to pull. Garshin, may I pull. Garshan, may I pull, feminine. Garshit, may you pull. Garshat, may you pull, feminine. Garish, may he pull. Grasha, may she pull. Sorry, Garsha, may she pull. Garshuch, may we pull. Garshutun, may you plural pull. Garshi, may they pull. Why is this good news? If you compare it to here, Howen, there's going to be a lot of scrolling here. Garshin, same ending. Hoyan, Garshan. Howit, Garshit. Hoyat, Garshat. Howe, Garish. Hoya, Garsha. Hauch, Garshuch. Hawotun, Garshutun. Hawe, Garshi. Very, very, very similar. And I very strongly recommend, yes, it's great. Memorize, do the intellectual work of memorizing these endings, noon and tau and whatever. That's great. Also get a feel for it. Say it out loud. Get sort of the rhythm, the feeling of the word. Let your body learn the language as well. Here's another example. To do or to make. Odin, may I do. Odin. Odit. Odat. Awith. Oda. Oduch. Odutun. Odi. Compare these. These are on the same page. Let's take a look. Garshan, Odin. Exactly the same pattern. You're just plugging in three different root letters into the sort of openings. Think about it like algebra. These are variables. The root letters are variables. The rest are constants. So the noon is like a constant. Odin, Garshin. It's always there. What changes is the root letters. In fact, the pthaha is always there. Garshin, odin. This zlama, shin, then. So these stay the same. The root letters are what change when you want to say something different. Garshin, odin. Garshan, odin. Garshit, odit. Garshat, odat. Garish, awith. Garsha, oda. Garshuch, oduch. Garshutun, odutun. Garshi, odi. I really strongly recommend learning it in that way, getting a feel for the words like that. Now, here's another little tidbit. The subjunctive, you can take this conjugation and you can combine it with the particle ted. This is a nice word, ted, in order to form statements of purpose. Ted odin, so that I can, so that I may do, in order to do, in order that I may do. That's what the word ted means, this little particle. This is a nice construction. Now, another piece of good news, as you saw above with the to be verb, the present tense, so what we just learned is the subjunctive, may I do, may I pull. Well, guess how you make a present tense? It's the same thing. You add kap to the beginning of the root, and you have the present tense. Here's the present tense. Kodin, or kodin. You can move the vowel back to the kap. Kodin, kodan, kodit, kodat, kawid, koda, koduch, kodutun, kodi. It is identical to the subjunctive. Odin, kodin. It's identical except you add the kap. Odin, kodin. Odan, kodan. Odit, kodit, and so on. So really, you're memorizing the subjunctive, and then you're remembering that the kap goes at the beginning to make a present tense. The endings of the conjugations above should be memorized since their pattern repeats in all present tense conjugations, all. Here is the paradigm of the ending. So now, what I did here is, I just took the endings and put them by themselves. So if you want to just learn what the endings look like, here's a reference chart. So this is another kind of historical thing. I don't really think this is very important, but a possible development of the present tense, maybe from an older dialect. Kad'awidna kodin. Kad'awid'at kodin. This is Syriac. This is the older kind of scholastic Aramaic. What we're doing here is we're showing how this can kind of turn into this over history. Maybe, maybe not. Who knows? Kad'awidna kodin. Kad'awid'at kodit. Kad'awid kawid. Kad'awdinan koduch. This is a little questionable, right? It doesn't really follow that well. Maybe the heth turned into a kap at the end. Maybe. Kad'oditun, kodutun, kad'odin, kodi. Yeah, I think it's plausible. This is not important. This is really for people that already know Syriac, that know the scholastic dialect of Aramaic. If you already know it, this might be a way for you to kind of remember it. If you have no idea what I just said, don't worry about it. This is not very important for learning. Okay. Note well that in every case, negation can be expressed simply by adding la to the beginning of each verb. So if you want to say I am not, la iwin or lewin, lewin, la iwin, lewin. I am not. Lakodin, I do not make. La garshin, let me not pull. Lak garshin, I do not pull. Sorry. Yeah, I do not pull. So you can just put la at the beginning and it just makes it not. Very simple. Okay, this is maybe the hardest chapter of the book. If you made it through, congratulations. Learn this stuff, feel good about it, and then you can move on to the next one. Let's look at these verbs. Oh, look, so just as I said, you have bashel, bashole. So you have this form, the subjunctive, he, and then you have bashole, the infinitive. Again, don't worry about why there's two of them. You'll find out later. Bashel, bashole, cook. Gachak, gchaka, laugh. Again, this is a hard hayth. Gachak, gchaka. Ganu, gnawa, to steal. Garish, grasha. Damach, dmacha. By the way, so all these can fit into the patterns that you learned earlier. And that's going to be part of your homework, is to take some new ones and to put them into those patterns to practice how the patterns work. Garish, grasha. Damach, dmacha, to sleep. Da'al, da'ala, to see. Da'ith, da'atha, to sweat. Daris, drasa, to study. They can also say darish, drasha. That's another way to say this. Zade, zda'a, to fear. Zare, zra'a, to sow. Hamil, hmala, to stop, at least in one dialect. Khasr, khsara. This is a hard hayth. Put a dot there if you want. Khasr, khsara. Khashu, khshawa, to think. Again, put a dot by that hayth. Kathu, kthawa, to write. Lawish, luasha, to wear. Nacheth, oh, this is a typo. This should be nacheth and chatha, not nahath. Nacheth and chatha, to descend. Napel and pala, to fall. Saper, spara, to wait. Awid, uada, to do or to make. We saw that one. Ariq, araqa, to run. Palig, laga, to divide. Sometimes this gemel is silent, so it's pale, pla'a. But the root really is palig, plaga. Palich, placha, another hard hayth, to work or to labor. Qaru, qrawa, to approach. Shawq, shwaqa, to forgive or to abandon. Shame, shma'a, to hear. Shaqal, shqala, to take. You take any of these verbs and any other verb you find, you plug it into the pattern that we saw in this chapter, and it'll mean, so if you want to say zare, if you want to say I sow, gzar'in, you put a kap at the beginning, gzar in, and you put that vowel there, and you put the nun, gzar'in, it means I sow, and so on. This is really a thing to practice and to make sure you understand. Some nouns: God is Alaha, truth is Haqutha, Isha, Mshiha, Jesus Christ, Nahmana, resurrector. I'm doing a lot of religious words here. Lord is Mara, Lord God is Maria. So Maria means Lord, Mar. Yah is Yah or Yahweh. So the Lord God. Yahweh is God's name in the Old Testament, right? Maryam is Mary, Baghra is body. Some new nouns here. Exercises. Really spend some time doing this. Fully conjugate 7 verbs in this chapter's vocabulary in the present tense. Here's another example I gave you, even though there's a lot in the chapter. I took mpala, to fall, knaplin, knaplan. So do 7 more or as many as you can handle. Now we have full sentences we can translate, not just phrases. Have fun with this. Take your time with it. Let it really absorb. And now you can translate full sentences into Chaldean actively. Really enjoy this as you're doing it. And then write some sentences of your own using the material and the vocab from chapters 1 through 5. You don't know how to say the future tense yet or the past tense. Stick with the present tense or the subjunctive. All right. Good luck.